Bienvenidos a esta sesión. Nos acompañan en esta ocasión Rachel Taliaferro y Efren Ricardet de la empresa de Sage y nos van a estar platicando un poquito sobre Sage Business Case. Adelante, la sesión, se dieron cuenta, está siendo grabada para futuras consultas. Adelante. Welcome, Rachel. You can start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Rachel Taliaferro. I am an acquisitions editor with Sage Business Cases, and I oversee our Sage Originals publishing program. So today I'll be talking a little bit to you about Sage Business Cases and a little bit of background on the collection, and then some tips and tricks around what we're looking for and what we believe makes an effective teaching case. So if you've written cases before, or if you're hoping to get started writing cases and you'd like to publish them, I'll be going over the main qualities and requirements in a case that we look for when we're commissioning our cases. And hopefully by the end of the session, we'll have a little bit of time to answer any questions. So just as a brief introductory note, if you're not familiar with Sage Business Cases, we are a digital collection of more than 4,000 case studies. We are targeted toward the library market. So we do not do a per case purchase model and instead sell to academic libraries as a full collection. And the main part, the backbone of the collection is made up of our Sage Originals, which is our cases that are completely commissioned, developed, and published by Sage. They can be based on direct field research, on secondary sources, or on disguised organizations. And I will go into more details about what these categories mean a little bit later. For every case, we do require teaching notes, discussion questions, learning outcomes, and teaching objectives. And this is to ensure maximum impact in the classroom. And our editorial process for Sage Originals includes a double-blind peer review, which is then followed by a comprehensive developmental review by one of Sage's in-house editors. And I just want to emphasize that this developmental review is not something that any other case publishers do. Sage Business Cases does it for every single case that is submitted to us. And it's particularly valuable for new case writers, novice case writers who might be writing their first or second case or might not be quite comfortable writing cases yet, because this provides you the opportunity to work directly with one of our editors. So if you submit a case and you get peer review feedback and you're not quite sure how to integrate that feedback into your case, then you'll be able to work alongside a Sage editor in helping refine and strengthen your case for resubmission. So it's a really great opportunity, especially for novice case writers. Our editorial vision for our Sage Originals is mainly that no matter what the subject or the academic level that the case is that it asks students to think critically and to apply history and theory to real-world situations. And we're looking for cases that can provide foundational coverage, but that can also fill content gaps with diverse and global viewpoints. So for example, Mexico and South America are not very well represented in all of case publishing. It's actually quite difficult to find cases from any of the main case publishers that focus on that region. So we're actually actively looking for cases to be written from a Mexican perspective or from a South American perspective so that we can build a truly globally representative collection. So we're absolutely open to cases that consider different cultural contexts and different economic perspectives. And we really encourage our authors to work with their own local environment when they're trying to find a subject or a topic for a case. So what are the main elements that we look for in a teaching case? We define cases as curated narratives that are used for learning, that are based on real-world situations in the business environment. We prefer cases to be experiential and problem-based. We receive a lot of submissions that are very descriptive or that read more like an industry report or a business or company profile, and that don't actually have discussion questions that ask students to apply their critical thinking or problem solving skills. And there isn't a whole lot of learning value in those kinds of cases. So we really prefer cases to be problem-based and experiential so that students are able to engage those critical thinking skills when they're trying to resolve a dilemma. We also look for cases that stoke the magic of the classroom, so to speak. And this means cases that are open to discussion, that are somewhat open-ended. We like cases to not have any specific correct or incorrect answers or resolutions. And this is because we want our cases to reflect the real world. And I'm sure, as everyone knows in their own jobs, anytime you come across a problem in the workplace, you usually have multiple options of how to resolve that dilemma. And there's usually not a single correct or incorrect answer. And it really requires your own learning and experience and your own judgment in order to come up with a resolution. So we want cases to be able to represent that kind of experience so that students can start gaining some classroom experience in having to judge what their options are, having to weigh which one might be best or which one might be worse. And those tend to be the best classroom experiences for cases, or cases where students can debate or discuss different options and find out which one works for them, or which one they believe works best for the case itself. And we also look for cases that provide opportunities for scaffolded learning. So this means cases that can be adapted to an undergraduate classroom or a postgraduate classroom that can easily change academic levels or complexity based on the discussion questions or based on how the instructor chooses to teach that case in the classroom. So we look for cases, again, that are very open-ended, that are somewhat complex, and that are flexible, that you can be adapted to different learning environments. So again, these are the main categories of cases that we accept. The first and most common type is a direct case. These are cases that are based on field research. They could contain interviews or proprietary information from the company, maybe internal documents. And these do require a signed release form from the company or the organization that you're working with. And that's something that SAGE can provide when you submit your case. The second type of case is an indirect case, and this is based on secondary or publicly available sources. It does not require a release form from an organization, and it's a good option for cases that might be somewhat critical or might be focusing on something that went wrong at a company, or it's something that the company did wrong. Because usually if you're working directly with a company, they would want that case to be very complimentary or to maybe gloss over some mistakes that it made, and they might not want certain information being made public, or they might not want to talk about that. So an indirect case is a really great way to be able to write some more in-depth cases about a specific organization without having to seek out that permission from the company. And we also accept experience cases. And these are typically based on an author's own experience, and they're usually disguised or fictionalized. And this is a good option for authors who are working directly with the company. But again, that company might not want certain information being made public. Maybe it doesn't want its financials being made public or certain strategies being made public, but they're willing to sort of disguise or change some of the facts about the story. So we do accept cases that have been disguised. And like I said, it's a good option for companies or organizations that might be a little bit sensitive about having a case published about them. So one of the most common questions that I get from authors is just about getting started, especially for authors who aren't used to writing case studies for the classroom. So my first tip is to start by finding a home for your case. And this means having an idea of what kind of course your case is going to be taught in and what level of student is appropriate for the case. So whether you're teaching an undergraduate course or a postgraduate course, have an idea of what the target audience is going to be and what core theories and core subjects are going to be informing your case. In terms of finding a topic, this is something that I get questions about a lot. A lot of authors want to write about the most current topic, what's happening right now in the news. They want it to be as relevant as possible for students. And that's great. It's fantastic to have topics that your students might be able to be familiar with, or they might be about a company that they already recognize. But the problem with this is that we don't necessarily want cases to become fixed in time. You want there to be some longevity to the learning outcomes and to the discussion questions, so that even when the topic of the case is no longer timely, or even if a year or two has passed since you wrote the case, the learning outcomes and the discussion questions themselves will still be valuable and will still have some relevance in the classroom. So I try to advise authors to strike a balance between their topics being timely and evergreen. And this is really mostly about, like I said, building those learning outcomes and building the discussion questions in order to generate discussions every time the case is taught. And again, have the theoretical framework and perspective in mind as you get started on your case. Have an idea of what theories are informing the case and what frameworks that you want your students to learn. And this will start building your learning outcomes and teaching objectives. And that's a great place to get started as you get started on your case. So again, the ideal case is discovery-based, and it will allow students to analyze and problem solve as they read through the case. We've found that the best cases usually include multiple perspectives. And again, this is something, as everyone knows in their own experience in the workplace, there's not usually a straight line between having an issue, having a problem or a dilemma in the workplace, and then resolving that dilemma. There are usually multiple choices, multiple options that you can go through. There's usually multiple stakeholders. So we want students to be able to start considering those multiple viewpoints as they get used to problem solving or get used to critically thinking about certain workplace situations or certain business dilemmas. And the best way to organize cases is either chronologically or by topic. Sometimes we get cases that are just a jumble of information, and it's really hard to discern what the point is or what the decision point is in a case. So when it comes to organizing the information in your case, I really recommend either going by topic or by theory, or chronologically if your case is telling a story. So the main thing that we look for in cases is a decision point. Like I said, it's something that will stoke the critical thinking skills or the problem solving skills in the student, where they have to step into the role of the decision maker and decide where a case goes to once they're done reading it. So they'll either have a problem to solve, or they'll have to, give advice to, they'll be stepping into the role of an imaginary consultant and will have to advise a company on what step to take next. So we want there to be a decision point. We do not want descriptive cases where the discussion questions just ask students to repeat back what they learned over the case. We want them to be open-ended so that students can start getting that experience of having to apply their critical thinking skills and to solve problems and make decisions on their own. Um, my best piece of advice, we get so many submissions from authors who have not tested their cases in the classroom. And usually these go through peer review and they fall apart quickly. The peer reviewer will have a lot of questions about the case, a lot of questions about how it should be taught in the classroom. So my best piece of advice, if you are writing a case or if you've already written a case, is to test it out once or twice in your own classroom. This will actually be your best editor. Your students will be your best editors. They'll be the ones who are best positioned to tell you if the case is too difficult or if it's not difficult enough, or if there's information that they need to have in the case that you haven't written into the case. So that's really the best way to gauge whether your case is actually effective as a learning and teaching tool. And I know some instructors can be shy about using their own materials in the classroom, but it really is the best way to strengthen your case before you submit it for peer review, because you'll have that experience. You'll be able to make changes to your cases according to what your students' response to it was. If you find that it didn't actually stoke discussion, you might want to edit the discussion questions to be a little bit more open-ended. So that's really my best piece of advice. And it's going to be the best way to submit a strong case to peer review that has already been tested in the classroom, and that will assure probably fewer comments from the peer reviewer around the teaching notes if you've already tested it. And cases are not free PR. So what does this mean? We get a lot of cases that authors have worked directly with companies for. They're based on direct field research. And usually what happens in those situations is that the company sees it as an opportunity for advertisement or for endorsement. And they want a case to be written from a very complimentary perspective. And that's not what cases are about. You know, even if a company is doing fantastic work, cases should be written in a neutral, objective tone. And they should still have some kind of learning value. There should be learning outcomes and discussion questions attached to a case that requires a student to more closely examine the company or more closely examine a company's strategies. And it's not meant for free advertisement or PR. So if you're working with a company and they're wanting to add, you know, language that seems like an endorsement or language that seems, you know, like you're basically writing a commercial for them, you might want to step back a little bit and either talk to the company about writing the case in a more neutral tone, or even consider changing the case to be a disguised case or an indirect case. Because cases aren't meant to sell students on a product or to sell students on a certain company. They're meant to learn something in the classroom. So be cautious of that if you're working directly with the company, because it's a frequent problem that comes up, is that the company will want final say in what content is included in the case, and usually they'll want it to be something like an advertisement or an endorsement. So just be cautious of that, and if you ever come across that and have any questions about how to handle it, I'm always here as an editor to answer any questions, whether or not you're submitting your case to us, because it is a frequent problem that happens a lot. So tips and tricks for organizing and writing the story. I encourage authors to really make use of quotes or organization charts or graphics. We hear all the time that students just do not want to read anymore. They don't want to read long cases that are, 10,000 words that are just text. So we really encourage authors to try to consolidate information by making use of graphics, of charts, bar graphs, family organization charts, especially if your case is about a family business, quotations that you can set up as sort of block quotations or pull out quotes, just elements that will help consolidate information and to help break up the text so that students aren't just faced with 10,000 pages that they'd have to read. Something that might make the case a little bit more dynamic. Keep in mind that case studies are not journal articles. You don't have to write them in the same very dry academic tone that journal articles are written in. You can have fun, you can tell a story, you can have dialogue, you can have conflict and tension, you know, all of that good stuff that, you know, might make watching a television show fun or might make reading a book fun. You can incorporate some of those aspects into a case study because they are very person-based. They're very, you know, based on the real world. And you are most of the time telling a story about something that happened at a company or a dilemma that a company is facing. So feel free to have fun with it and to try to get a little bit creative with it. Those will be the cases that students will want to read more, the ones that tell a little bit of a story and that incorporate characters or quotes or real life issues, rather than the ones that are written in a very dry academic tone. So feel free to have fun and to try to flex your creative writing muscles. Don't lead the reader in one specific direction. This basically means don't give the answer away as you're writing the case. You want the discussion questions to be able to ask that students come up with a decision or a solution on their own, rather than giving away what a company did or what you think the company should do. If you are writing a case about something that has already been resolved, a problem that a company faced that they've already fixed, you might want to add what the company did into the teaching notes as an epilogue, rather than including it in the case and just sort of telling the students what happened. You want to be able to give them the opportunity to come up with a solution or a resolution on their own. And another tip that I have, and this is just after years of working with authors and trying to find the best way to write a case, is to write the case and the teaching note simultaneously, because each one informs the other. The learning outcomes should inform the teaching objectives and vice versa. And the discussion questions will inform what the suggested teaching strategy is and vice versa. So it's usually beneficial to write those at the same time so that they're nicely aligned. What happens a lot is that we'll have cases that get submitted, and then the teaching note will be super complex and will bring in a bunch of theories or frameworks or information that wasn't included in the case. So sometimes we get cases submitted where there's no way that a student could actually respond to these discussion questions because not all of the information was given in the case. It's been included in the teaching notes. So writing the case and the teaching notes at the same time will help you make sure that you have all of the information that students need to have in order to respond to those discussion questions within the case itself, so that you don't include anything that seems like a surprise in the teaching note, and then either the instructor doesn't know how to teach it in the classroom, or the students won't have the information or the tools that they need in order to work through the case. So final tips for successful publication. We do have a set of author guidelines. And I can send those out to Blanca and to Rocio after this so that they can circulate it. But we do have required components. As I said, we do require discussion questions and learning outcomes and teaching objectives. So make sure all of those required components are in the case and in the teaching note before you submit. Otherwise, it'll just be returned right back to you. The best word count that we've found is between 1,000 and 5,000 words for the case itself. And again, this is just because we've been hearing from instructors and from students that anything longer than that, they're not really willing to read that long. So anything between 1,000 and 5,000 words seems to be the ideal point, the ideal length for case studies. The teaching note, you can make as long as you want. We don't have a recommended word limit on that. And that's usually where a lot of the scholarship behind a case goes into. So we don't have a maximum word limit for the teaching notes. students typically aren't going to be reading the teaching notes. So those, feel free to make as in-depth as you want, but the case itself, you want to be, concise and brief and to be able to tell a story in a very efficient way. Make sure that the abstract and the case summary and the learning objectives and the teaching outcomes aren't exact copies. We have a lot of authors who will just copy and paste the abstract into the teaching note as the case summary, or they'll copy and paste the learning objectives as the teaching outcomes. Remember that the abstract and the learning objectives, those are what the students are going to be reading. That's aimed at the classroom, at the students, whereas the case summary and the teaching outcomes are meant for the instructors. So while they might have similar goals, they're also going to be slightly different, and they should be written toward the two different audiences of students on one hand and instructors on the other. And finally, consider your final audience. Sage Business Cases is a global product. We are in academic libraries across the world, and we have a very international audience. So if you're writing about a very local context, you might want to provide some extra context around that. So define foreign terms if you've included them in the case. If there are regional nuances or geographic nuances about your case topic, maybe try to include a little bit of an explainer or primer for that in your case, so that students who might be reading the case, for example, in France or Africa, have all the context that they need to understand the topic in the case. And finally, I just want to give a shout out to our Latin America series. This is edited by Doctora Marta Corrales Estrada at Tec de Monterrey, and it's focused on Latin American cases or cases from Mexico. And this is, again, to touch on a point that I covered earlier, which is that Mexico and South America and Latin America are not well represented in case scholarship at all. If you look through cases, through Ivy or Harvard, there's really a small percentage that Mexico and Latin America takes up, which really isn't accurate considering what a key factor these regions are in the global economy, and how big of a role they play in the global economy. So we're actively looking for more cases that are focused on these regions or that are written from a Latin American perspective. And they can be either about companies that are operating in Mexico or Latin America, or about Mexican companies or Latin American companies that are operating elsewhere. But the important part is for us is that we just bring that representation into case scholarship, because it is a very glaring gap to us as we survey the scholarship that's out there. It's very obvious that there's a big chunk of the world missing from the countries that are typically represented, or the kinds of companies that are typically represented in case studies. So I really encourage authors to work with their local environment, to work with their local businesses, and to write more cases from their own perspective. This helps us build a more globally representative collection, and it helps students learn about how companies and how businesses work in different parts of the world. So for example, a family business in Mexico might have a completely different way of operating than a family business in Japan, for example. So we really want all of those nuances, those cultural and those regional nuances, to be represented in case studies. So if you're writing about a company, a local company, or if you're writing from a Mexican perspective, for example, I really encourage you to submit to this series, because it'll be curated on our website, and it'll be easily discoverable, and hopefully will help filling that gap in case scholarship. So some final benefits for Sage Business Cases authors. As I mentioned, we do have a double-blind peer review, so you will be able to include your cases on your CV as having been double-blind peer reviewed. Freedom to include your students in the case research and writing process. This is something that we really encourage instructors to do, especially if you're teaching a course in which students are having to write a case or having to study a case study. Usually for students, especially for graduate students, it might be their first experience publishing, or it might be their first time experiencing what the peer review process is like. So it can be a very good learning opportunity for them to include them in your research and writing process. As mentioned, we do provide the developmental editing service. This is completely free. We provide it to everyone who submits a case. And again, it's especially beneficial if you are a first-time case writer, or if you're not comfortable writing in English. If you don't feel super confident about what you've written in English and need an editor to help you with some of the language, we'll have that editorial support on hand for you. We do offer an honorarium upon case acceptance of $400, and this is for every case that gets submitted. Authors will retain copyright in their name. Once a case is published, we'll be able to provide a formatted PDF, a toll-free link to access the case directly via our website, a final URL, and a unique DOI and ISBN. And we're also indexed on Google Scholar for increased discoverability. As mentioned, we do have an international audience, and our usage statistics really show that cases do tend to be used globally. We'll have cases that were written about a French company that are used in Australia and New Zealand. So sometimes the results are surprising, but there is an international audience and potential for your case to be used worldwide. So that's sort of the quick tour of SBC. And I went over, some of the main questions that we get. But if you have any questions, or if you're interested in submitting a case, or if you have drafts that you want feedback on, please don't hesitate to send me a copy. I'm always available and I'm always happy to give feedback. So on that note, I think I will turn it over to Blanca and Rocio to see if there are any questions from the audience.
¿Alguna pregunta, profe, alumno? ¿Algún interés para publicar y obtener todos estos beneficios que Rachel nos acaba de compartir?
Any questions so far?
Yes. Hi, good morning. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Blanca and Rocio. Okay. Rachel, how many authors are allowed in each business case?
As many as you want, really. We don't have a limit. Typically, what we usually get is between 1 and 4 authors. It's not common that we see 5 or 6 co-authors, but you're welcome to bring on co-authors as you wish.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Yep. I'm seeing a question here in the chat. If you are interested in cases from Latin America, do you prefer them to be written in Spanish or English? We publish primarily in English, so the case that is submitted to peer review would have to be submitted in English. But you are also welcome to provide a Spanish translation. So once your case has been reviewed, if you want to translate it back to Spanish, we can always include that as a supplemental resource for students and for instructors.
I have a question. Is it often that students send cases to Sage? Because I'm thinking about graduate, or those that are close to research, even though they are undergraduate, but they are taking that path to research.
Yes, actually, we get a lot of cases that are written solely by graduate students. And we do have cases that are written by undergraduate students, but they're usually co-authored by a faculty advisor.
Okay. And if the case is passes through everything, so teachers can have these payment from the to a case, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I also want to mention something that I left out of the presentation, is multimedia components are also very welcome. So if you have recorded interviews, if you're working directly with a company and if you've recorded interviews, or if you have video content, those are always great additions to a case. They make them more dynamic. Students love watching video or listening to audio. And our platform is set up to support those different multimedia types. So please feel free to include those if you have them with your case. I'm seeing a question from Nancy Westrup. I believe you're muted, Nancy.
I wasn't sure if the mute part was my responsibility or both. You know. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I think we really need it. And you know, I've worked throughout Latin America, and I have found that sometimes people think, okay, Latin America is just one big country. Well, it's not. You know, there are different cultures. And so I believe it would be to our advantage as people from Latin America or teachers in Latin America to open the world to that truth, and that we might work even together on something like that, you know, to be so that people really know what Latin America is. So I thank you for this, and yes, I think we should also make an effort to, as Latin Americans, to if we write something in English but also in Spanish, it would help us a lot, I think. And
Yes.
thank you so much. Oh, and another thing I asked was, you know, your presentation is so good, but I was trying to write it all. And are we going to get a copy of it, you know, of your PowerPoint?
I will send Blanca and Rocio a copy of this PowerPoint to circulate along with the author guidelines.
Oh, thank you. And please come back again to them, okay?
I will. I'm actually, we're tentatively planning an in-person visit some point next year. So hopefully I will be there in Monterrey in person and sometime in the near future.
Okay, well, I'll invite you to my home.
You're invited here.
Okay.
You're invited to them.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you
Monica,
so much.
I see you have your hand up.
Yes, Rachel, is there some certificate or something like that? For example, I can do a business guide with the students, for example, when I work, okay? So I think that it may be very motivator to the student to receive any certificate of business, the SAGE, from SAGE, okay?
Yes.
Is there a certificate?
Yes, we do provide a certificate of publication once your case has been published. So it's a nice, pretty designed certificate that that students can have and can include in their CV if they want to.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
And
And
Nancy,
I want a copy too, please.
yeah.
Of the presentation or any material, yes?
Absolutely, yes. And Nancy, just to add to what you're saying, I'm in complete agreement. I grew up on the Texas-Mexico border in the Rio Grande Valley. My mother's family is from Mexico. My dad worked in Mexico his whole career. And it's kind of shocking to me sometimes looking at case scholarship and knowing from firsthand experience just how much Mexico contributes to the global economy and to the North American economy, and not seeing it represented in case studies. So I'm in complete agreement with you that there needs to be more representation of this region, and more, you know, there are nuances from country to country. You know, Mexico is not the same as Colombia or Nicaragua. So,
Yeah. And even within Mexico, Mexico has many Mexicos.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was born here in Monterrey, but I grew up in Houston. Okay, so I'm a citizen really of at least the first place of both countries. Okay, but yes, I've had the opportunity to work in others as well.
Great. Well, I encourage you to take advantage, and everyone here to take advantage of this publishing opportunity, and hopefully we can start filling this gap in publishing.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
There's another question, voice, man.
I don't hear you. Astrid.
I have, I think, yes, you can hear me.
Yes,
Well,
we
I
can hear
think,
you.
you explained everything very clear, and as well as Nancy and Monica, I would love to have all the material that was presented today. But also, I don't know, I wanted to like Blanca and Rocio, like how can we access the cases that are already of SAGE at the library, UDEM library? Is there a specific link that we need to go if we want to visit those cases that are already there?
Yes, I can show you if, Rachel, can I share my, or do you need your presentation more? Let me open my,
And the session has been recorded, and I don't know if it's gonna be in Udem in Casa or something like that. Rocio
Yes.
knows that.
yeah, it's going to be in Udem en Casa. Also, Rachel is going to send me the presentation and I will show you. Here is the library page, biblioteca.udem.edu.mx. En bases de datos, it can be by schools or en orden alfabético. En orden alfabético, you only place Sage on the searching box, and they are going to be the first one. Or it can be in business, by school, in business. We are going to need our credentials or our ID and password of them page. And we can we can access to all of the material. or the open or the subscribed material that UDEM has. We can show them or we can find them by discipline or by collection.
Yes, and later, if you're interested in one case, we can give you the password of the teaching notes.
Teaching notes.
Mhm.
Because then, for example, I will show an accounting and it's a column or a part to the teaching notes when you open them. Here, the teaching notes. But we don't have access as a normal people. As normal, but we need to ask for the password and user.
We can give you the password later.
Oh, okay, so for that, we contact someone from the library and they help us in that access.
Yes.
And the PIN is the same that we use for the UDEM's portal, or because I use, or the one for, or email, because I saw that you put your period in yours, like your name, period, and last name.
It was in my username of el portal UDEM.
The portal UDEM, okay.
Yes.
The same.
And then you can make your profile.
Okay.
But inside of the database.
It's because it's as your email, so our email UDEM. It will be our email UDEM without udem.edu or complete.
Es mi usuario del portal, sería a lo mejor va a haber alguien que sea Juan López, bueno, es que aquí me acuerdo, Juan.López46, por ejemplo, de acuerdo al tiempo que hayan sido contratados, es diferente.
Es la del portal. O
la
el
del portal.
Es que son las dos, vea, te pide cualquiera de las dos.
Es la primera, el primer acceso es con el usuario y contraseña del portal.
Perfecto.
Ya dentro de cada base de datos, en cualquier base de datos, lo recomendable es hacer una cuenta personal. Ahora sí con el correo.
Perfecto.
No están por default, las tenemos que crear y eso nos permite después bajarla en un dispositivo y poder sincronizar muchas veces.
Sí. Y la recomendación es que si la base de datos pide una cuenta, sea el correo institucional para que sea más fácil y se reconozca mejor.
Excelente, muchas gracias, Rocío y Blanca.
Nancy?
Maestra Nancy.
Sí, una pregunta. He hablado con algunos de ustedes, he interactuado porque estoy interesada, sí, en hacer algo esto de los casos y sabiendo que hemos tenido por muchos años muchos proyectos en la biblioteca de la UDEM, de los alumnos excelentes que terminaron con excelencia y en la maestría en desarrollo organizacional y cambio, y tengo entendido que los están pasando a que sean que ya no estén escritos, sino que sean, ¿cómo el término es
Las tesis están digitales en el
digitales? Sí,
repositorio.
sí. ¿Ya están digitales o están en el proceso
Están en
todavía?
unas ya se digitalizaron. Digo, esta es otra pregunta aparte, pero están
Sí,
dentro de la página en recursos,
sí,
repositorio. Ahí faltan algunas
ajá,
porque entre la pandemia y todo, el proceso ha sido un poquito lento,
sí,
pero ya la mayoría, están almacenadas y la mayoría se van a encontrar en nuestra página de repositorio.
ujú,
Son las tesis digitalizadas,
sí,
siempre y cuando obviamente hayan llegado a biblioteca, porque muchas veces se quedaron hasta el director de carrera.
sí, exacto. Ajá. Si en algo les puedo ayudar, estoy a sus órdenes, Rocío, ¿eh? Sé que
Muchas
tienen
gracias.
mucho trabajo, pero yo ya estoy jubilada, estoy aquí en la casa, no salgo. Así es que
No, que claro que,
si en algo les puedo ayudar, ya saben que yo quiero mucho a la UDEM, ¿verdad? Y le debo mucho a la UDEM, ¿eh?
claro que sí, muchas
Así es
gracias.
que estoy a sus órdenes.
Muchas
Gracias.
gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta para Rachel, Efren o Carla, que nos acompañan con muchísimo gusto, como siempre, desde Sage? Igual después se pueden hacer más individuales, more individual sessions in order to help somebody who is interested in it.
Yes. Can you share your email, Rachel? You showed already your information, but can you share here on the chat?
I wrote it. But again, Rachel, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so
gracias.
much for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.